The Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
I rise to speak in the debate on the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service Amendment Bill and the accompanying Crimes Amendment Bill number 3. I obviously am not on the committee and haven't taken a particular role in the passage of this legislation through the House, but I've always taken a significant interest in matters of human rights and also matters around security intelligence matters as well. Largely with a period of time having been New Zealand's Minister of Immigration, I have had occasion to work with the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. But what I wanted to particularly acknowledge Keith Lock's contribution to the debate. I don't always agree with all aspects of his contributions in these matters, but I just want to put on the record that I believe that he has been a sincere and consistent voice for civil liberties and human rights in this House, and I think it's a voice that will be missed. So I really wanted to place that on the record. I listened to his contribution very carefully, and I felt that this place will be poorer for that voice not being here in the future. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say why I believe that the bill should proceed, even though obviously there was some consideration given to the broader security review which will now take place and to which Keith Lock referred. I've spent some time considering the regulatory impact statement, as I want to do on legislation, as some members of the House will know. And what I appreciated about this regulatory impact statement is that it actually does meet the standards of good regulatory practice, because what it does is it establishes all the different options, and there's really only 3 options that they could consider in this particular instance, and they are the status quo, which they rejected for reasons which I think will be obvious, but I'll come back to those. The second was to defer the legislation, and that was to pick up the point that Keith Lock made, which was the fundamental review of New Zealand security legislation happening in the next 2 to 3 years, and would it be better to tie this legislation up within that context rather than just updating the legislation seemingly on an ad hoc basis. Or thirdly, to have an immediate amendment to the legislation by way of an amendment bill, such as we are now dealing with in third reading today, to address high priority amendments. And the amendments that are identified in the regulatory impact statement are those amendments that we are considering in the House today, providing an express framework for the use of electronic tracking and location devices, clarifying the approach to qualified exemptions for computer offences, expressly providing for the specification of facilities, addressing protections from liability for those persons acting under warrants, amending the requirement to specify those persons assisting under warrant, and fixing gaps in the delegation powers of the Director of Security. The reason that I wanted to actually mention what the particular amendments were in relation to is because of why the government has decided not, and why the regulatory impact statement, which was prepared by the SIS, did not prefer the status quo. And the reason they did not prefer the status quo was because of the forthcoming Rugby World Cup being held in New Zealand 10 years after the September 11 event. And I think that we can't ignore that in New Zealand. We might feel that we are at the other end of the world, but we are inviting the world to participate in a very major event in this country, and I believe that we have to be cautious and we have to be careful, and that does require us to update our security intelligence legislation in the manner that is proposed. As my colleague was just making the point as he was concluding his comments, David Shearer, he was making the point that the Intelligence and Security Committee actually made some amendments to the bill as it was going through the committee. And I think picking up where he left off, the submission of the Human Rights Commission was quite a powerful submission that was heard by the committee, and in that it asked that the principles section include reference to human rights, democratic oversight, impartiality and professionalism in terms of the role of the Security Intelligence Service. And I think that they are very, very important changes. And I think my colleague was saying that it is felt that sometimes that the Human Rights Commission doesn't have sufficient teeth, but I think that this was a really good example of where the Human Rights Commission made a valuable contribution to the process and has improved the legislation or led to the improving of the legislation as a result. Mr. Speaker, the other speakers on the bill have talked about the nature of the independent review of the regulatory impact analysis that was prepared by the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service, and that was reviewed by Dr. Warren Young from the Law Commission. And in his comments he stated that while there are some impacts on privacy, this is clearly justified by the associated benefits, in particular updating the warrant framework as a recognition of technological changes in the storage of and communication of information, and is essential in order to enable the NZSIS to continue to effectively undertake its statutory functions. And I think that that was certainly reassurance on our side for the continuation of this. The other point that I wanted to really bring to the House's attention was that in the regulatory impact statement there was quite a significant aspect of the analysis itself that talked about benefits in terms of the balancing that has to be undertaken between rights, privacy rights, human rights, and also our security as a nation. And they had this quote from Geoffrey Palmer, which I thought was well worth placing on the record, and it begins by reference to national security, privacy and other fundamental civil liberties being complementary rather than conflicting values. And this is the quote from Sir Geoffrey Palmer. To a very significant extent, national security means just this: freedom from interference, freedom from terrorist attack, freedom from deliberately incited racial violence, freedom from espionage, which itself threatens basic freedoms such as privacy, freedom from the kind of genuinely subversive activity which is aimed not just in theory but in fact at destabilising or overthrowing the very democratic system upon which the exercise of civil liberties depends. And I thought that that was a wonderful summary of the competing interests that we debate as competing interests when they may in fact be more complementary rather than conflicting in nature. And I thought that that was certainly one that was very important, a very important point to make. The Law Commission also, when it was looking at search and surveillance powers recently, had this to say, that while there is a balance to be struck, there is a good deal of complementarity between the two sets of values, particularly in a strong democratic state such as New Zealand. Search powers that encroach too far on human rights values are unlikely to gain legislative or community support. Similarly, investigative powers that are too tightly controlled and that prevent law enforcement officers from doing their job effectively will bring human rights norms into disrepute. And again, I think that complementarity principle is one that is well worth taking into account as we consider this legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly happy to stand here in this House and support the passage of this legislation. I do look forward to the modernising of our New Zealand Security Intelligence Service framework. I think it is important that that proceed and that it does gain that broad public support that we do need for protecting all of those values that we hold dear to our hearts.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote. Clerk will conduct the party vote.
New Zealand National,
58 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour,
42 votes in favour.
Green Party,
9 votes against.
ACT New Zealand,
5 in favour.
Māori Party, Progressive,
Vote in favour.
United Future,
1 vote in favour.
Honourable Chris Carter.
1 vote against.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 107, the noes are 10. The motion is agreed to.
New Zealand Security Intelligence Service Amendment Bill, third reading. Crimes Amendment Bill number 3, third reading.
Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.